Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, we are talking about how to spot hidden sleep training information, right? How do you know when something is actually sleep training or coming at sleep from a sleep training perspective when it's all dressed up and fancied up with really gentle language? Because that is really common. And it's becoming increasingly more common that you see all this lovely framing that sounds quite responsive and quite lovely and quite gentle and wonderful. And when it comes down to it, this is really sleep training. It's really just the same old, same old. And I hear so many stories from parents who, reached out to what they thought was a gentle sleep coach, someone using gentle methods. And then when they got into it, it was a lot of ignoring baby and crying and didn't feel very gentle to them at all, without a lot of other options. So I see this as a huge problem, and I thought we could talk about some of the ways you might spot these sleep training in disguise, right? These hidden sleep training sneakiness. Now, I don't think I can be comprehensive on this, so I would absolutely love to hear ways that you see red flags or things that concern you or make you think something is sleep training, because it's a big topic, right? These are some of the things that come to mind for me. Now, the first is that we can think of this from a few different angles, right? There is the fact that we live in a sleep training culture. So all of our beliefs and expectations that we have around sleep to a certain extent are influenced by sleep training. It is the dominant way that we think about sleep and make sense of sleep and interpret our babies' and toddlers' behaviors around sleep. So even when a family does not want to sleep train, actively, consciously knows that is not the path they want to do, a lot of times those sleep training expectations are still there, right? It can be hard to identify them. And so I think it's helpful to just understand how pervasive sleep training is, right? And so there's this cultural pervasiveness, I just use that word, but another word is not coming to me, of sleep training. And then there's looking at individual pieces of advice, right? Does this feel like a sleep training piece of advice or not? Does this feel like a sleep training strategy or not? And then there's looking at an individual sleep coach. Does this person feel like they're practicing from a sleep training sort of theoretical orientation, or do they feel like they are practicing from a more responsive or attachment-based developmental theoretical orientation, right? How are they approaching sleep? What is the paradigm they are using to look at sleep? So I feel like those things all overlap to a certain extent, but it's helpful for me at least to think about that those are also slightly different pieces. So honestly, in the most simplest terms, any piece of information, advice that treats a baby or a young child as though the only way to have healthy, restful sleep is for that baby to sleep separate from you and not need you overnight. That is sleep training. And the assumption that that should be every parent's goal. Now, because everybody likes to misinterpret everything, right? That's sort of the world we live in. Of course, that can be your goal and you can still not sleep train, right? What I mean here is the expectation that this is the only way to have healthy family sleep. That is the sleep training belief, because we're not recognizing that some babies and some young children have more or less capability for that sleep setup, and that it is natural and biologically normative to want to sleep close and need support overnight, right? And so you can work on separate sleep, you can work on independent sleep within a responsive developmental framework. It's just going to look really different, and the messaging is going to be really different than if we're talking about it from a sleep training perspective, in which it's often shown to be, or portrayed to be, the only way to have healthy sleep. And there's often a lot of pressure around it, like fear-based messaging. And I think that's another big thing that usually clues me into something is probably sleep training related, is fear-based messaging, right? You're going to miss some magic window of opportunity. Or do this while it's younger, it's easier. That's a big one. Saying that separate sleep or needing you less is easier when they're younger, because that is directly contradictory to what we know from a developmental perspective. And so that's a big hint, like, that means it's easier to ignore this baby while they can only lay in their crib than once they can stand up and use their words, right? That's kind of what that says to me. Along those same lines, another thing that tends to set my red flag, definitely red flag for me, is talking a lot about self-soothing, right? And self-soothing by ignoring your baby's cries around sleep, and that we're somehow going to teach them how to self-soothe. That is a huge red flag to me. That says this person does not understand neuroscience or stress, or anything about development and sleep. So that's a big red flag to me. Another red flag that is for me is this idea of teaching sleep, or teaching the skill of sleep, giving the gift of sleep. That one is usually going hand in hand with some sort of sleep training. I don't know that I've ever seen that used in a gentle framework. I mean, I guess in theory it could, but I don't know that it ever has. So that's a big red flag for me. Anything that suggests that ignoring your baby's needs, or ignoring their signaling, ignoring their crying once they stop means the need went away, right? As opposed to the need being suppressed. Nope. Definitely looking at this through a behavioral lens and not a neuroscience informed lens. A lot of the shoulds, the sleep rules, and I did a lot of episodes on them early in the podcast. The should sleep through the night, should not need night feeds. These one size fits all, very prescriptive things tend to go hand in hand with sleep training, because if we're acknowledging the diversity of baby sleep, we aren't saying these things, right? And once we acknowledge the diversity, we have to acknowledge that all babies can't get to the same outcome. And then we're automatically in a more curious and open-minded and developmental place than we were if we're saying all babies should be able to sleep through the night and not need night feeds, after X months old. So that's another one, that every baby can get the same outcome in a certain amount of time. Those are red flags to me. I get those questions a lot from parents when they're reaching out to work with me. Well, what's the timeline, to see this? Or I want 1 wake per night, or no wakes per night. And, humans don't have formulas, right? These are babies. They're not robots. It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. So I think expecting all babies or toddlers to get the same outcome is definitely a red flag around sleep training strategies or ideas underpinning that work. Another one is guarantees for me. And this is more around sleep coaches, right? If you are guaranteeing outcomes, I always tend to see it around sleep training, right? Someone's using some sort of cried out or controlled crying strategy, whatever language they're using, that tends to be at the heart of things when there's a lot of guarantees. Maybe that's a broad generalization, and maybe somebody listening has seen it in a more actually gentle place. but that's usually a red flag to me that something isn't sitting right, because we shouldn't be putting guarantees on people, right? And specific outcomes around human babies. So when we're looking at sleep information, I think it's worth questioning, like, do we feel pressure to achieve something by a certain time? And why is that? A lot of times it comes back to these sleep training ideas, right? Especially if it's external pressure, as opposed to like you internally thinking, oh, I want to stop bed sharing before I have another baby or something like that. Or I want to stop contact napping before my baby gets too big, because I do a lot of baby wearing contact naps, right? That's a you decision about your own dynamics and your own situation versus I feel like my baby is one now, and I feel like they should be able to sleep on their own, right? That's more of an external expectation. That's more about other people's ideas of what your baby should do. Again, kind of coming from that sleep training cultural expectation. So it's helpful to kind of reflect, where's this idea coming from? And then really thinking about, when we're looking at a strategy, like, is this emphasizing connection? Am I supporting the baby's experience? Are we thinking about what's realistic for their temperament? Am I emotionally available? Like, maybe we're stopping nursing to sleep, and so we can't give the baby or the toddler everything they want because they want to nurse to sleep. But are we emotionally available? Like, are we supporting them through that process? Are we trying to make small steps, or are we just saying, okay, we're done, boom, And there's a lot of gray area here, but I think these are things worth thinking through. And when we're thinking about working with other professionals, right? How do they talk about the work that they do, right? Do they acknowledge that different babies are going to be able to do different things? What happens when things don't work? How do they interact with their clients? Because, man, not every family is going to see the success they want. That is just a fact. We're not magic, unfortunately. Sometimes there are so many forces beyond everyone's control that we're not always going to get it to look exactly like we want it to look like. And it's just reality. So, how do you relate to parents when things aren't going well? Or how do they react? How does a sleep coach handle when something doesn't feel right? I think the desire to tell parents to ignore their instincts generally goes hand in hand with a lot of sleep training ideas, as opposed to desire to talk through, see what's not feeling right, see if it's a point we need to educate on, or simply we need a different strategy. This doesn't feel right. So I feel like I'm rambling a bit here, but you see what I mean? There's a lot of ways where we get these expectations and ideas and information and ways we present supporting parents that are sneaky, right? They're sleep training woven into what seems like really gentle language and messaging. And so when you see threads of these in the information that you're reading, whether it's a social post, a short video, someone's website, a blog, an email, a course, a guide, it's good to be savvy. It's good to be a little bit skeptical. Not so skeptical that you can't realize that there are really genuinely great information out there, but a little skeptical that everybody isn't sharing information that is as gentle as it's presented. So I would love to hear if you have any big red flags that you found that make you think something might be sleep training. I would love to be able to create a comprehensive checklist to help parents kind of cut through that so no one ends up working with a sleep coach or taking information from a sleep source that looks gentle but really isn't aligned with their values. But gosh, it's hard. It's hard even as a professional looking at other sleep sites, right? Trying to cut through sort of the hype and figure out what are they doing underneath there. And sometimes I just have my best guess just as much as you have your best guess. If I don't know, the certifications, or I don't know them individually. That's why I'm really careful about referring out when it's folks who I feel like maybe aren't a good fit for me. I only have a few people that I feel relatively comfortable referring to, who are maybe work differently enough from me, but still work in a way that I feel is I'm comfortable with. But yeah, I would love to hear if you have any things that jump out to you. These are some of the things that jump out to me. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.